Greetings, sisters and brothers, comrades, friends. Welcome to this episode of Kumbukeni podcast. I'm your host today, Milton Allimadi, joined as always by my wonderful co-host. Let's start with Sister Nduku. Please introduce yourself to the world.
Habari gani and karibuni to Kumbukeni. Once again, we are sitting in conversation with my brothers Adesoji and Allimadi. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Today's conversation is going to have a little humor as we ridicule these terms. Looking forward to it.
All the way from the belly of the beast.
Well, as usual, I bring you greetings from former heart of the empire. And my name is Adesoji Iginla. I'm reaching you here from London, heart of the empire.
One of the audience members did suggest in the comments that we should move it from belly of the beast to the center of imperialism, and then the US is the belly of the beast.
Oh, I agree. That's absolutely accurate. I love that suggestion. Yes, audience, always feel free to help us improve with any suggestions. I approve that one, 100%. So, friends, sisters, brothers, today we're going to be looking at colonial terminology. But in essence, it's really a discussion of demonization, right? Slavery, colonialism, and neo-colonialism. And we want to understand how the so-called inferior races were created and why that is. And in fact, as you, my comrades, know, that is the theme of my book, Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. Because in order to prepare the mindset of the public for the crimes that accompanied slavery, colonialism, neo-colonialism, imperialism, you have to dehumanize the people that are about to be victimized. I think before we even get into the specific terminology used, I think we have to maybe talk a little bit about the context. The context. So one of the most infamous documents, and many of our colleagues, comrades may not be familiar with, was the Papal Bull of June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V. Papal Bull, people may refer to it as Papal BS. The Dum Diversas. It gave Portugal the right to imperialize Africa and Spain the right to conquer South America. And the language is very interesting. So let's look at what it says. That the territories where people were, quote, unbelievers, quote, pagans, and, quote, enemies of Christ.
Yes.
Right? Think about that. Enemies of Christ. And therefore, the Portuguese and the Spanish were given divine permission to, quote, invade, search out, capture, and subjugate, end quote. This is supposed to be Christianity, right?
Say that one more time, invade.
Okay, they were given divine permission to, quote, invade, search out, capture, and subjugate the people in these territories. And, quote, this is direct language coming from the Papal BS, quote, reduce their persons to perpetual servitude. So in other words, if we are to go by that document from His Divine Eminence, the Pope, from 1452, all of us on this show today are enslaved because it says perpetual servitude, right? So in countries, I don't know specifically when in Britain, but in the United States, 1862, 63, when slavery was abolished. Mm-hmm. But that was done by mere mortals. How can that supersede a papal
divine
bull? Think about that, from 1452. So we don't even know if we are actually free today.
Do we need the Catholic Church to grant us our liberation? Should we write a request to the Pope?
I think we need to do a petition.
Yeah, but the question is, has that papal bull, has it been repealed?
I don't believe so.
This is a good question.
So, which means if we go to the Vatican and someone puts their hand on our shoulder, we're effectively captured.
which is also ironic. Which is also ironic, given all the Africans walking into Catholic churches feeling redeemed and.
Absolutely. And wasn't a Nigerian almost made a pope?
Yes, Cardinal Arize. Yes.
Perhaps he would have revoked and repealed.
This is a good question when it comes to critical thinking for the Christians, the Catholics, because this is where the Pope falls under. You ask yourself, and I was born and raised Catholic, which is why I have stepped away from that organization, because that's what it simply is. It's an organization.
My late mother was a Catholic. May she rest, in eternal
Uganda
peace.
has a lot of saints. They did a number on Uganda.
A series of beatification ceremonies.
They did quite the number on Uganda. And so for me, it's to have the liberation of Africans and to have Christianity as we know it, as this Christianity that you're talking about, where the Pope gave divine sanction to these two nations. The two cannot go together.
Yeah.
But I will let you take on, Brother Allimadi.
No, I want listeners to examine that. We have to know the history of all these things. So that's where you come with words such as pagans, to demonize us. But, and this is the good thing, that once you have your own platform, you can have a free-flowing, enlightening discussion. Because then let's look at the reality, because part of the essence of that papal BS was that the mission of the Portuguese and the Spanish were to, quote, civilize these savages, correct?
Yes.
But let's look at the history. Let's look at some of the history. When was England created? 927 AD. So in the 10th century, correct?
Yes. And William the Conqueror sat on the throne 1066, yes.
Which in historical terms is just yesterday.
Yesterday.
Kemet. When was Egypt unified? Under Emperor Narmer.
Look at you,
Narmer. And I suggest that our audience who are not familiar should look up Narmer, because there's actually an image of his bust available on Google. And according to European standards, he's as African as you can get,
He has a wide nose.
Their own standards,
No, but why did you qualify it?
He has a wide nose.
Why do you qualify it that he's as African as they guess?
The big lips.
You seem to think Egyptians were not Africans.
Not the Egyptians of today. No, not the Egyptians of today. The Egyptians of today have a confused allegiance. In fact, they don't want any connection with their African ancestry. It's complicated, as you know, because the world began in Africa, and then our sisters and brothers spread all over the world. And as they spread all over the world, they took on different features. But
they were also invaded by the Romans and the Greeks. So there's that.
But even before they became Romans and Greeks, they looked like us, 100,000 years ago, before adaptation, change. And then sadly, the adaptation also affected the mind. So you're coming home, instead of saying, oh, I'm happy to be back home, you're saying, oh, look at these savages. Look at how they look, not knowing that this is the original look for all of us, But they didn't have this knowledge. They didn't have this education, So 3,200 years ago, that's when Egypt was unified. when there were no Europeans, quote unquote, at that time. So that's why England could not have existed. Let's look at the United States. When was the United States created?
That was 1776.
Yesterday,
Technically.
in historical terms.
Yes.
Ghana, ancient Ghana.
Ancient Ghana,
300 AD. Think about that.
Jeez.
Aksum, which is what transformed into
Ethiopia.
Yeah. Aksum, 400 BC, before the Christian era, BC, 400. Mali, 13th century. So relatively recent, but Mali compared to Germany was created in 1866, which is yesterday. Italy, 1861. Yesterday.
But Brother Allimadi, what does it matter if they were created before? They were still savages and uncivilized. So these new countries come up and they decide they're more civilized and they need to civilize us. What were the Africans doing back then that showed their civilization?
They were only creating those pyramids, for example.
Oh.
You see, that's what I like telling my students. I tell my students, okay, so if they say Africans did not create the pyramids, and somehow European or Asiatic people had responsibility for that, I asked them, don't you think they would create some in their own homes before coming to Africa? And then the students, their eyes just light up immediately.
Neocolonialism is a good example of that.
It makes sense to ask simple common sense questions.
And he also ties into this, that just because you see the pyramids in Egypt, to give you an idea that it's something that transpires across Africa. It's not only in Egypt that you have the pyramids.
Correct.
You also have them in the Sudan.
Absolutely. Correct.
With granite rocks.
Correct.
And we cannot argue about how the Sudanese look like. That is
because even the pyramids, takes on their features. It is dark.
Absolutely. And also, of course, a lot of people are not familiar. They just think that pyramids were built actually to attract tourism. They don't realize that the shape itself, was the whole African concept of elevating spirituality. You see? So these were the same savages who were trying to elevate spirituality.
And these people who are not, who are pagan, they apparently had, as you say, spirituality. And they, on those pyramids, right, they held their ceremonies, their prayers.
Absolutely.
Right? So my question,
so why don't we look at some of the terminology? Go ahead.
Yes, please. I have a question for you. So the Pope is talking about pagans. And we know, as you mentioned right now, we had spirituality. What is this connected to white supremacy? Like, is this them saying our way of faith is better than theirs? What's going on here? Because we do have spirituality.
Of course. In fact, they hijacked a concept which was not even European, the whole concept of monotheism. And then the evolution into Christianity, one of the great religions, or Islam, right? These are all concepts that originated in ancient Kemet, aka ancient Egypt. You see? So, and people that want to explore this further, and that's one of the good things we like doing on this show, is to recommend readings. And of course, in this instance, is Check Anta Jobs, African Origin of Civilization. Yeah, that must be it is a must-read book. It's not very thick, but it packs a lot of power. And he breaks this down into the whole concept of the origins of spirituality, not religion, the commercialized version of it. They didn't ask you to drop all that money, to open your wallet whenever you came to heal.
Also a seat.
Hey. You have to earn your seat at the front of the church, depending on how much you give too.
Nowadays, right?
Or you'll be sitting in the back with the goats.
And the most corrupted version was it last year, when a so-called minister, I don't know what denomination he is, but he claims to be a Christian. was robbed and it was being live streamed.
That was in
chains. Wearing this gold chain. He was robbed. Valuables worth $1 million. That was on his person.
You will have thought God will have interceded in his
the story with this individual, just like the invaders, he's coming from a place where his residence is in a different location, a place of affluence, and he's going to a place that is not as blessed with resources to preach to them,
to the natives. Okay, so now let's look at some of this terminology. Let's look at the era of slavery, for example. When, of course, when you had to create a mindset that would make it acceptable for Africans to be enslaved and treated like beasts, like animals, to force them to produce in the mines, in the plantations, in the so-called New World. So what were some of the terminology used in that era? This is before colonialism in Africa. Obviously, I think beast was one such terminology.
You just mentioned it,
You have to call them beast.
Barbaric and beastly.
Barbaric and beastly. Those would be appropriate terms for people that were about to be, and then subsequently were indeed enslaved. And then when did the N-word evolve? Because that was a word that was also used.
And it was created
in the plantations consistently.
It did not exist, yes.
Right? A demonizing word that, of course, exists with us today, even in the 21st century. And just a brief diversion. Yesterday, I was involved in a reading of the book, The Dead Are Arising, the story of Malcolm X by the late Les Payne, who was a friend of mine, co-written by his daughter, Tamara Payne, who also spoke. There's a section in that book, which I highly recommend, by the way, that book. That book is more than just about Malcolm.
Malcolm X, yeah.
He did excellent research. He set the setting, the context that created the environment that produced Malcolm's father, Earl Little, and then Malcolm himself. The white terrorism that followed after the end of formal slavery in the United States. He has excellent chapters describing that. It's just remarkable. But also there's a chapter, and I bring this up because we're discussing the N-word, where Malcolm was sent by the late Elijah Muhammad, Minister Elijah Muhammad, to meet with the leadership of the KKK.
Oh yes, I remember that meeting.
Yes. That meeting is remarkable. It's been alluded to in the past, referred to even in the autobiography. But the details provided in this chapter is just amazing. I won't go into it, but I'll just go into one aspect where the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan leader, is saying to Malcolm and another minister who hosted the meeting in his home, saying, "We don't hate all," and he uses N-word. We don't hate all N-word people.
We just hate.
Yeah. He said, for example, you guys seem to be, perfect N-word people. You seem to be reasonable N-word people. Imagine.
Just to add, Brother Allimadi, the book is on Audible as an audio for those who want to do that. Should take that as an option, yes.
Yes, so I highly recommend that. But now let's move to the motherland then. Let's move to the continent. Before the Europeans formally colonized, they had to condition the mindset in Europe to make it acceptable. The crimes, the barbaric violence they were about to visit upon Africans. So the so-called explorers went there, the Speaks, Grant, Livingstone, and many of them, what did they do? They so-called
discovered
Lake Victoria, which exists up today in East Africa, right? Bordering Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania.
Because the people who lived there were blind and they did not see it.
They were blind, even though they had their own indigenous
They
African
were fishing
names.
From there, they were swimming, they were doing...
Not only that, they led the Europeans. They led them to the lake, and then the Europeans discovered it and called it Lake Victoria. Victoria Falls, between Zimbabwe, and Zambia, named after Queen Victoria, the same Queen Victoria who executed Nyahanda, one of the women who led the resistance against colonization. She was executed in the 1890s, and her head was cut off and taken as a trophy to England. And the Great Phenomenon Falls, named after her executioner. And up to date, that has not yet been corrected.
But the name
but that's a whole different conversation about our own mindset.
But then the locals had and
give
still,
the names that the
still
locals
keep the
gave,
name, the
yes.
original name. It's called it's called Mosi Intunya, the smoke that thunders.
And for Lake Victoria?
Lake Victoria, Nam Lolwe. That was the authentic African name.
So it's Mosi Intunya for the one in Zimbabwe, between Zimbabwe and Zambia. You can actually see it very clearly from the Zambian border.
Right. Adesoji, what does Mosi Intunya mean?
It means the smoke that thunders.
Yes.
Because you hear it before you see it.
Exactly. But look how deep-seated this work that the Europeans have done, that up to date we have so-called African presidents, African prime ministers, and yet they would not dare to change the names of these lakes. Let me give you another perversion
of something that is
and they don't even have to come up with the names. They can go back to the original names.
They can go back to the original name. Absolutely. A good suggestion. I agree with you. Even though we have some of our own icons who deserve recognition. Why don't you name them? Mandela, Sobukwe, Biko, Ya Asantewa, Mugabe. We have all these names. Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah. We
can do that. We can do that for the avenues.
Over Lake Victoria. Yes, you're right.
We can do that for the avenues.
We do that for buildings.
We give the names originally named because they have reason. For example, the smoke that thunders, that there was, the Africans thought about that when they looked at it. It wasn't just, let's name it after some woman.
Absolutely.
No, it was, what does this do?
Very good. You've won me over, sister.
I'm glad. Welcome.
You've won me. Let's go to the original names.
I have a question for you.
Which were organic, as you said.
They had
the reason why they give those names.
Yes. I have a question for you, Brother Allimadi. Why are you doing this today? Why are we doing this? Why are we going through these names and explaining this to our audience today?
Very good. Because obviously our mindset is still colonized. We have, in many cases, I'm not referring to the party seated here, even though if we critique very carefully, we might find there's things that we ourselves still need to liberate ourselves from. I believe it's virtually impossible to have physical, economic, spiritual liberation if the mind is still colonized.
True.
And that is the biggest challenge that we as a people face, in Africa. Yeah. And once the mind is decolonized, the transformation about our capabilities is tremendous. And the example we always refer to is our late brother, Thomas Sankara. Look what he was able to accomplish when he removed that shackle of the brains of the Burkinabe. Within the short time that the brother was in leadership,
their clothing, how they dressed.
He asked simple questions. If you import your own food, how can you say you're independent? If you import the clothing that you wear, how can you say you're independent? So all of this is connected. We want people to examine these words. So we're going to go back and examine some of the words used prior to colonization, but there's a contemporary word that comes back immediately because this came up in my class recently. Third world.
Yeah.
So one of the students was discussing.
Hold on, before you go on to since we were mentioning icons, I mean, it will be remiss of us not to mention in the month of February that it will mark 66 years that Dedan Kimathi was martyred by the British. So that was, for those who love their history, it was the 18th of February, 1957. 18th of February 1957. So that this year will mark 66 years that he's been martyred. Go on.
And please, audience, look him up, read the history. Dedan, D-E-D-A-N, Dan, and the last name is Kimati, Kimathi.
Yeah, we shared a book during our African land episode. You can go there. Yes, there it is.
Excellent.
There. Thank you,
Excellent.
Adesoji.
Yes, one of
that
the leaders
that book
of the Kenya Land and Freedom.
You have letters written directly from them. You can hear their own words about what's going on.
Very good. So keep that in mind, Brother Adesoji. When we come back, I want you to discuss Mau Mau when we get to that, and how it's tied into Dedan Kimathi.
But one more before you go in, Brother Milton. Should we wait for the African leaders to change the names, or can we as the people take over and start calling those places the names that they were?
We should start calling those places the names that they were originally. And I like that you offer that suggestion, because now with social media, they don't have monopoly over the narrative. So if we start using that name consistently, and things change. It did not get official interjection for our sisters and brothers in the United States to change what they were calling themselves, right?
Yes.
They never referred to themselves as inferior people. You know, they never did. They never felt that way, because they were always in a state of rebelliousness, right? There were many rebellions against enslavement. You know, one of the most famous, of course, being Nat Turner. But in terms of calling themselves Negro, they didn't wait for official dispensation to say, oh, no, from now on, you can refer to yourself as Black or as Afro-American. You see? So I agree with you. People can take agency over these narratives. And when it comes to the names, in fact, I wrote an op-ed, I think 2 years ago, calling upon people to start changing the names. I wrote it on Black Star. I wrote it for Sahara Reporters, and I wrote it for the Zimbabwe Herald, and it got very good traffic. Yes. So there's people are interested in taking control of those names.
And we can put something together, the three of us, of the real names, and we can put it out to our audience, our Patreon community.
Absolutely,
once
I like
we put
that.
it together, right?
I like that. We should do that.
The false name and the real names and their meanings, and we can send it out.
Very good.
While I'm disrupting your process,
it's all good. You are adding value.
Thank you.
And this is the value of these type of conversations. You come up with instant solutions.
Thank you. I heard that you made your own discovery in the recent years. Could you please explain to us what you discovered?
Oh, you're very funny, you know. And that's why it's good to have this conversation, because
explain to us what you discovered in expeditions.
Yeah. So three years ago, I visited my siblings in London, and then I went to this,
and you survived it. Survived it.
I survived. I'm here today. I came out alive. This river that flows through the city, and I asked the natives, what it was called.
No, you didn't ask them. You took it upon yourself to name it. You did not ask them.
It's called Thames. So I don't understand what that word means. So since I discovered it, I gave it an appropriate name. I call it Gulu River, Gulu. That happens to be my ancestral city in Uganda. And then I took a photograph and I posted it on my Facebook page. Lo and behold, I woke up the next day and I went to my Twitter account. The thing had been posted, in fact, by a Kenyan brother. So, bless him for promoting my discovery. He posted the image from my Facebook to Twitter, and he said, oh, an African comrade has made this great discovery in a place called London. And then after that, it was retweeted hundreds and hundreds of times. The next thing I know, it's on the BBC. So if you go to bbc.com, you'll see a story. It was on several African newspapers,
Gulu River in London.
Gulu River in London. But here's the best thing. And this is what I like Africans taking agency. African sisters and brothers from different African countries started posing in front of rivers and lakes in Europe, statues in Europe, and they were renaming it.
Renaming them.
Giving them African names, So if you're not familiar with this, go to Twitter and put Gulu River, and you'll see the multiple conversations that have been transpiring over the last 3 years. So, sister, thank you for reminding us of that. And that's how we can change all these names and revert back to Africa. All right, so now let me say what my student said. My student was referring to something in the third world. And I said, okay, interesting term. I said, who are these people in the third world? How do third worlders look? How do third worlders dress? How do they speak?
How do they think?
How do they think? And then she was like, she froze. I think she realized where I was getting. So yeah, I want us to think about these terminology. So give me like a definition of a third worlder. What are some of the characteristics? Then she started saying, well, according to the United States of America, I said, okay, that's good. Now I see that you are thinking and analyzing this term by the use of the term according to. And then she started laughing because she had caught herself. According to the United States, they're less developed than us. I said, and what do you mean by less developed? You know, morally, spiritually, are they bad people? Are you saying because they walk around in flip-flops and sandals? Is that the image that comes to mind? And then the class started annoying, and we got into a very interesting conversation over that. I asked us there, I said, do you think they call themselves third worlders?
Exactly. Yeah, how do they see themselves?
I don't think so. So whenever you hear this terminology, think about them. Who comes up with this terminology and for what purposes, right? So that's just a contemporary example.
But let's one too. Yeah.
Let's walk back perhaps and go through the era. So now Samuel Baker and all these people preparing the European mindset to imperialize, to conquer Africa. What are some of the terminologies, comrades?
We start with crude and ugly.
Crude and ugly.
Savages.
Savages. Savages is actually one that was used for a long time. Savages, Americans became very familiar with because Tarzan.
Oh,
Tarzan.
You know how many times I innocently watched that?
Think about that. You know, we watch it growing up, and you think it's normal for a white man to be in Africa,
speaking to
saving Africans.
Speaking to the from the animals.
From the animals, right?
And speaking to
the Africans who have been there. And we know how Africans are connected to their environment. Have never figured out how to talk to these animals.
Think about that, right? It takes a European, swinging through the quote unquote jungle, and sometimes swinging while holding.
First of all,
with a white maiden as well.
Why did he not have sunscreen? That's the question I'm asking. That's my question. He didn't seem to have a sunburn.
That didn't make sense, right? No. So that's how the concept of African savages was really popularized by Hollywood and became quite acceptable, right? And then you had. Was this much later when you had backward people? Backward people became after
backward and
colonization.
Primitive.
Backward and primitive, because colonization was justified by saying we need to elevate these backward people to our European standards. Yes. And how do we do it, right? We do it by committing genocide in the Belgian Congo. Let's talk about that for a second. The Belgian Congo. Sister.
So for me, if you're referring to people as animals, as savages, as backward and primitive, you are building a case so that when you treat them in this inhumane way,
correct,
you can justify it because they're not human.
Correct.
They're not of the same level as you. Just like we justify slaughtering the animals that we eat for food. So that's what you're doing. So that it seems okay for you to do what you're doing.
Correct. Yes, brother.
I would go with what the Belgians did first. In fact, to be fair to them.
Fair. Lord have
mercy. To be fair to them, they moved on what the Catholic Church had already put in place.
Correct.
I'm glad you came back to that.
Which was,
Unbelief, pagans,
if you've got
enemies.
certain features that are closer to the Europeans, then you're far more closer to us.
My nice wide African nose, go on.
Which then laid the groundwork for the 1994 genocide. But before we go there, Belgium in the heart of Congo, with the only man that was sitting at the table during the Scramble of Africa by his own great self, King Leopold.
And brother, time out, we have to be details, make sure that all our audience are with us. So when you say the Scramble for Africa, you're referring to Berlin Conference, give them the date and everything so that people benefit.
Okay, yes.
From the entire
sorry.
Because they're still scrambling, brother.
Okay, so it's the Berlin, it was the Scramble for Africa under the auspices of the Berlin Conference of 1885, at which, quote unquote, the powers decided to slice up Africa like a cake. So one man decided he wanted the entire heart of Africa, known as the Congo, for himself. He proceeded to plunder not just Congo for its resources, which at the time was rubber, but also went so far as vilifying the people. When I say vilifying, I'm actually being nice. Killing the people in the quest for the rubber. And there's a very good book on that massacre by Adam Hochschild, titled King Leopolds Ghost.
Correct.
So if it's one of the most, it's a seminal work on what happened in the Congo, and will give you understanding and a background into what still transpires within the Congo in the area of cobalt and lithium and what have you. This sets
the tone
for what will come later.
As we talk about terms, yes, and that book is called Leopolds Ghost. In my head, they used the word demons to describe Africans, and I'm flipping it. Leopold is a demon. He's coming to haunt the people of Africa. There are children in Africa who, when they think about the things that are done, they have nightmares. So it's not just a ghost. There's something else in that.
I think when Adam used the word ghost here, he was sort of saying, if you want to understand Congo, the ghost, Congo. The ghost of the empire is still
that looms
haunting.
Over them. Yes,
it's still haunting that very place. So,
and in fact, it's the ghost of Leopold, but the ghost of European imperialism on Africa. It's the entire Africa.
Yes, indeed.
And the other detail, brother, for our audience who may not be as familiar as what you're referring to, in addition to the massacres with estimates of 10 million Congolese dead, a very barbaric practice against the so-called barbarians. So if they did not meet their quota, as we recall, they would cut off their hands or their feet, and they would make other Congolese hold it up and be photographed. And the photos are in the book, by the way.
Yes.
And these photos were then circulated widely within the country to induce others to meet their quota.
Which brings me to the story as to why this gentleman is standing facing the camera, why his picture is the cover of this book. He was the king of a village where quotas were demanded of the people, women and children. And when they came and quotas were not met and hands were about to be chopped off, he said, what is the use of a village where they have no hands? That's the man that stood up against the barbarity. And he said, cut my hands instead. So that's why you have his picture there. So
and that's an African leader that is putting his people first.
And we can't say that kind of bravery exists amongst many African leaders today in the 21st century.
That same barbarism was also done in a little part called Namibia.
But wait 1 minute, brother Adesoji. Are you speaking of the Africans or the the white invaders when you say
I am
barbarism.
talking about the Germans this time.
But I thought the Africans were the barbaric ones.
Yeah, but then you have to, if it's not your case, you would continue to think the Africans were the barbarians.
It's who controls the narrative, correct?
So
that's why we are having this discussion today.
Exactly. So we've done Belgium just now in the Congo. Just down the corner from Congo, in Namibia, the Germans also did what was called the Forgotten Holocaust. Consider the Forgotten Holocaust when they nearly exterminated the Nama and the Hereros.
Yep.
The peoples of Namas and the Hereros. In fact, during the Nuremberg trial, when what's his name? His name escapes me now. When one of the generals was being tried and that case was brought up, he said, "What are you talking about?" in reference to the British. That we learnt it from you. We only perfected what you taught us.
Was it Goebbels?
Yes, Goebbels. Yes. So,
and in Namibia, one of the most barbaric ways was to drive almost the entire population
into the
desert.
The Kalahari Desert.
And then fence off the return route so that they could not return.
Could not go back. And then
just imagine.
Poison the wells that were on the way to the desert. So that even if they can get back, you can't drink.
I'm trying to control myself,
you can't drink.
No, it's terrible, sister. But we need to know this history. Like my students sometimes say, some of these things.
And I know it, but every time we talk about it, this is what it does.
Exactly.
And for me,
it triggers.
This is the thing that I want to say to Africans as we talk about these words and as we continue to decolonize our minds.
No, hold on. Before you go there is also the need that not only did it happen, in some cases they're actually so brazen that they show you the prices of what they did. And with that in mind, I refer you to what happened late January 1897 in Benin, called the Benin Expedition, that will lead to having this mask sitting at pride of place in the British Museum.
That reminds me of the movie Tomb Raider. And what's his name again? The guy with the hat that has a series of movies.
The white man. Indiana Jones.
Like, we all watch these movies, enjoying them, laughing, ha ha ha. But they're talking about colonialism.
Yes. So, I mean,
and unless you listen to a conversation like this, you will not be able to tie it into that.
No.
Yeah. But go ahead, brother. Proceed.
So, with that said, the British Museum is one of the most visited places in the United Kingdom. In London, if you come to London, there are queues, endless queues from the start in the morning to the closing and a going. But here's the thing: when you go in there, the crowd are usually in two places. They're in the Egyptian area,
Africa,
and the African section. And in the African section, the pride of place is this mask. You come in because there is a light beaming on it. Your eyes are immediately drawn to it. And you see those two dark eyes. You stay into it. You know something magical happened with the making of that mask.
So if the people that they are going to civilize are so backward and primitive, why take their stuff?
Okay, two points on that. Namibia, the manifestation exists with us today. In the 21st century, in terms of taking that stuff, there's a European population of 6% controlling 72% of the land as we speak today, in spite of these historical crimes. And that also speaks to a level of humanity that Africans have that is unsurpassed But sometimes people say, maybe it's a bit too much. Maybe it's a bit too generous. How do you live with the memory that the contemporary population of Europeans making 6% in Namibia still are depriving you of your livelihood by controlling 72% of the land?
Arable land,
which they took possession of by driving your ancestors into the deserts, by cutting off their heads and then hoisting it on spikes, along the way to terrify people. It's a whole different show that we need to get into a discussion on this African capacity to be accepting, and in this instance, perhaps too accepting.
Yeah.
So we have the same situation in South Africa. 8% European population in control of more than 70% of the arable land, even giving the horrific history of apartheid in South Africa, which was the same as in Namibia. One other point before I throw it back, comrades. You notice our comrade, our brother in the belly of the beast said,
the center of imperialism.
The center of imperialism. Said in the British Museum, and this is how the museum has categorized it. They have an Egypt section and an Africa section.
Same thing at the Met in New York. We actually stopped. My friend and I stopped to ask.
It was good that you caught it. That was what
Egypt
I was
is Africa,
say.
fools. I'm sorry. Sometimes there's no clean language for nonsense.
I was gonna come back on that, but you caught my.
They have the same thing at the Met in New York. We asked them, why are you doing this?
To confront them. It's our responsibility in the Met to say we discussed this.
Yes.
On our Kumbukeni podcast, and our obligation to send them a recording of this podcast.
Every time I go, I will go every year. I will be a source of pain for them. Every time I go and they have them separately, even if it's just one person, that day will not be a good day for them, because I will ask again, why is Egypt away from Africa?
No, we need to confront them with this knowledge.
Do you know what their reason was?
We can say, okay, maybe they're operating out of ignorance after all.
No, but do you know what the reason we were given was?
What was it?
Egypt has so much, it needs a room by itself. It's too much. And we walk right across the hallway to Rome and everything. They have a huge space.
That's fine. You can give them that space they need, but still call it
Africa.
The Met, or call it Egypt, Africa.
Extended Africa.
Exactly. It has to be clear that this is Africa. But the mere fact that they're giving you that response is sort of a concession to me, which I see as positive. It means with the amount of education that we will share with them, it will be difficult for them to refuse to do the right thing.
Yes. We're calling you out, the Met.
So which means one term that would need to also go is the fact that it's not the white burden. But actually, there are what Basil Davison will call the black man's
man's burden. The white man's burden, despite the fact that the black man did not ask them to come.
That is why Basil Davison tells you it is actually the other way around.
Say more, brother Adesoji.
It is the black man's burden, because not only have you created notions of nation states that are non-viable. I'll give you an example. Niger Republic, Chad, Djibouti.
No, but you're naming them without telling audience the reasons why you believe they're non-viable. Okay. Tell them some of the attributes of these.
Okay, so...
And it's not an insult to the nations as they exist now, right?
Because
they make that clear. It's not their choice. Yes.
They didn't draw the map. So
they didn't draw the map, so yes. So when I mentioned non-viable states, I meant during the Scramble for Africa, these states were carved out of, quote-unquote, land belonging to French-speaking, British-speaking, German-speaking, Portuguese-speaking. An example of some of these viable states are Chad and Niger Republic. These states have no borders near the sea, and they have no access to water. They're basically hogging the desert. Mauritania is another example. Hogging the desert.
Mm-hmm.
These are landmass where normally in the old course of African times, they were actually trade routes. They were never meant to be countries. But here we are.
Meaning no restriction in terms of their access to the water.
To the water. Well, here we are in the 21st century. To even traverse those spaces, you need a visa.
And if they need water, if the neighboring state, for some political reason, says no, they have to go to war. Think about that.
The thing I like about my conversations with you, our conversations together, is sometimes it's just in the moment that we think of things. We are shooting today for an hour, but we have so many words that we haven't covered. What do you both think about us doing shorts? Like short videos where we cover a few words and we explain them and we post them in our channel.
Without a doubt.
Right?
I support that. That's a great idea.
All right,
that's
go
a great
on,
idea. I'm sold. Yeah. Let me throw some of the words that we had discussed prior to our convening today.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see if you, sister, and then you, brother, would like to pick some of them and touch on them. So let me just read through first. Savages, natives, subjects, cannibals, dark world.
That one.
Backward or primitive people. Barbaric. So, sister, pick any one of these words.
I took dark world.
Yes.
Dark world.
And explain to our audience why you picked.
I picked dark world. So, and I am putting it together with this Pope. This man who has claimed that he is God sent and he's a divine ruler of people. And he has the authority, according to the creator of these earths and these peoples, to grant certain people the authority to go and abuse others. I'm connecting dark world to that, yes. Because to them, they are the world of light, right? The world that has light compared to the dark world.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seen what Christianity has done with dark, what they associate dark with. You see dark, you see the devil. You see dark, you see hell. You see dark, you see the night. And what is associated with night? Things that are evil, things that are bad, things that are harmful. Right. You see dark and you don't see beauty, despite the fact that dark has so much benefit. I bet you any white person who is going through skin issues because of the sun would give anything to have my melanin to protect them from the sun. They don't admit it, but they would. This is the thing that they envy about us. And so for me, the dark world, for Africa to be referred to as the dark world, is to villainize it and to diminish it and to associate it with things that are evil and not right, despite the irony that they're taking everything from Africa to build this light world. So Africans, for heaven's sake, wake up.
No, I agree. And the most horrific manifestation of this is an episode we discussed in one of our previous episodes of podcast of Kumbukeni, was in South Africa, where they developed the population register in 1934, I believe, or 1938, whereby you could actually appeal your racial designation because the higher attribute was white. And
I qualify before the two of you brothers. I am looking at myself right now. I think I qualify before the two of you do.
Yes, you qualify as a quote unquote colored.
Colored, yeah.
You know, so white at the top, you get all the maximum benefits of the state: job, living, school, education, healthcare, you name it.
It's not looking good for you, brothers.
Where you live. And then you have colored, and then you have African, right? So you, sister, you're colored. Perhaps with some work, you could appeal
to become white,
classified as European.
I could use.
I would have to work very hard to be accepted as colored and get the associated benefits.
Or use bleaching cream, which is what Africans
and that's
have done.
the point I was getting at. And in order to do that, so in fact, historically, South Africa has one of the highest per capita consumptions of bleaching cream.
Yeah.
Trying to move from African to color to
European.
White.
Ambi is one of them.
Legacy, yes, Embassy. One of the famous brands. So that legacy lives with us today, and it also is connected to colorism. Not only on the African continent, we are familiar with it here in the United States as well, and throughout the African diaspora. So now, brother, let me read, in addition to the points I read before, and this is focused on one of them. In addition to those points, let me read a few more, and then you can also focus on one of them. Grotesque, exotic, demons, Mau Mau, expedition, slaughter, bush people. Okay, so in addition to, wait, one more. one more. Terrorist organization. And finally, Watutsi giants.
That's a lot. I don't envy you, brother Adesoji. I do not envy you.
Pick on one. I'll throw it back to sister for one more. Come back to you, and then we close since we're running out of time anyway. So
I will take the Mau Mau because reason is, for one, it's a made-up word to vilify the reason for the agitation, which was access to the land. In certain, in Kikuyu, it's like if a man does not have access to the land, it is considered that he is not yet a man. He's still very much a boy, which is what the Europeans and the Indians referred to them as during colonization. Boy. So that's where that comes.
About Kenya for listeners.
Yeah, Kenya. Yeah, I'm talking about Kenya now.
And it's all around in Kenya, that value for land. Yeah.
So it used to be called what was deemed as Mau Mau is actually the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army, led by General Dedan Kimathi, who, again, in the month of February, we acknowledge his passing, his assassination, on the 18th of February, 1957. So, again, which man would not want to feed himself? You take away the man's ability to feed himself. What else is the man left with? You're effectively turning him into a pauper in his own land. So they were right and justified. And funny enough, that's, again, we have African leaders in power, and the ills of those times, just like in Namibia, have not been redressed.
Right. And in Kenya and in Africa generally, the land is also connected to spirituality. We have a special connection with that. The land is not just seen as a commodity where you plant and you reap. But even planting and reaping, it's connected to spirituality. South African people, you see? And the land, arrogantly, they had renamed it the White Highlands. To rub in the insult.
Funny how the White Highlands are in the dark world.
Very good. Well put. All right, sister, pick a point. One more. The brother will pick one more, and then we close today's enlightening conversation.
Do I need to pick amongst the ones you named?
No, it does not. It has to be something enlightening. We're good with that.
So one of them that stood out for me is Noble Africans versus True Negroes.
Excellent.
And I actually encourage both of you to join me in this one. And it's used to bring division.
In fact, let's wrap up with that one.
All right.
Brother and I will contribute to that.
Yes, please. It's used to bring division between the Tutsis and the Hutus. And the idea is, I believe the Tutsis are the ones with the narrower nose.
Correct.
and the Hutus are the ones with the wider nose. And because of that feature, the Tutsis are closer to whiteness.
Right.
They're closer to this divine being. And therefore, they're given access, right, and privilege, which is, and unfortunately in Rwanda, the unfortunate thing is that these are the two main tribes. It's not like Kenya where there are many tribes, so an attempt to divide is harder in a situation like that. But in Rwanda, it's simple. Two, let's take one, bring it close to whiteness, and make whiteness seem like this thing that must be achieved. And then let's take the other and bring it far away from whiteness and create division. And you create hate amongst brothers. Wake up, Africa.
Okay, very good. So before I give my own feedback about this, the so-called European Africans, the sister also used the word that we need to examine. Sister, remember the word you just used right now?
Dark world?
Nope.
What did I just use?
Begins with that T.
Tutsis?
Another one?
What did I just say?
Tribe.
Oh, but there's an explanation behind that.
I understand that. And this is what I want to tell our audience. When we as Africans use that word, it has a totally different meaning and connotation as when Europeans use it. When Europeans use it, they refer to tribal systems, which to them automatically translates to primitive. Tribal wars, So, for example, tribal
sticks
wars.
and stones.
They refer to tribal wars in Eastern Congo, which disguises the fact that it is these European corporations that are arming, financing the Africans so they can fight and then clear that land. And not by accident, Eastern Congo is where they have all the minerals, resources.
Can I just quickly ask you, Brother Allimadi, who brought in those machetes that they used in Rwanda?
The machetes, the guns, all of them. These are not manufactured domestically. You see? Yeah. Okay. So let me get back now to the whole thing that you brought up: noble versus savage Africans.
Yes.
In many of the writings, the Tutsi were referred to as false Africans. Think about that. False Africans. That is believed they were a European quote-unquote tribe that mysteriously appeared in this part of the world. And listeners, if you're hearing this for the first time, I encourage you to look at the research. There was an article in the New York Times Sunday magazine and later in the New Yorker by a writer named Alex Shumatov, glorifying Tutsi as Europeans and the Hutu. Essentially, if you read what he's writing, he's saying these are the savages and these are the knighted European Africans. And this is the side you should support in warfare. And that perception throughout history has been there, where European writers always demonize Africans that they thought were, or actually not thought, referred to as more quote unquote Negroid, as opposed to Africans that they referred to as resembling Europeans. In Kenya, it was the Maasai and the Wakavirondo that they admired the most. And in Rwanda and Burundi, Tutsi that they admired the most. The floor is yours, brother.
Okay. Yes. Speaking to Rwanda, two aspects stands out to me there. Has anyone noticed the demographics between the Tutsi Rwandans, the Tutsi and the Hutus in Rwanda, and the Tutsi and the Hutus in Burundi? That is a man-made problem. There is one with a very large population in one country, but a minority in another.
Yep.
And the countries are sitting side by side. A creation of the Belgians.
Yes.
So talk about creating a problem, but I would want to end with this. The so-called advanced researcher that wrote that piece created a mindset that these people are closer to us in features and that.
Right.
And that is the basis of Africa's problem till today.
Correct.
As written by Kwame Nkrumah in his book, The Class Struggle. They pick certain Africans, deem you to be better than the rest of them, either via education, giving you scholarship, you go and study in Germany, France, England, and you come back and you lord over your people on our behalf. So if you want to understand neocolonialism, again written by Kwame Nkrumah in the last stage of imperialism, that is the entire problem of the African continent in a nutshell.
Well put. Audience, sisters and brothers, friends, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I know this remarkable conversation could go on, and it suggests that we need to have a part 2 in the near future to continue this conversation. But also, what is implied, I think, in what we've been saying today is that we need a borderless Africa. We need a United States of Africa. That is the ultimate solution in us redeeming ourselves as African people.
And we need to take the names back.
Yes,
our
absolutely.
Ancestors.
Go ahead and say farewell, sister.
Yes, we must take the names back that our ancestors called these places where they lived and existed before the invaders came in. Just want to reach out to our audience, our Kumbukeni community, and those who are going to be listening to this video. If you want to support Kumbukeni, you can join our Patreon community on patreon.com/Kumbukeni, or you can subscribe to Kumbukeni's YouTube channel on youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. This will help myself, my brother Milton, my brother Adesoji spend and focus more time in doing the research and getting all this information that has been hidden from us. Yesterday, I was in a space, a Black community space, and it was revealed to me, I believe Namibian or Zimbabwean legend who was killed there that I never knew of. So there's a lot that has been covered up, and we need to discover it. So yes, support us, support Kumbukeni, and we thank you for joining us.
Comrade?
I would leave with the words of Julius Malema. When we said we are Africans, we can go anywhere we want to go. You were only visiting. You came here in 1652.
We love our brother.
And Africans, Nigerians, Ghanaians can go wherever it is they want to go to. On that basis, Africans should be for Africans.
And the call to action to the African Union is open up those borders, take away the visas for Africans. Let us walk from the north to the south, from the south to the north, from the east to the west freely, and intermingle and do trade with our brothers and sisters. Brother Allimadi.
On that note, a luta continua, as Samora Machel used to say.
Asante.
Victoria Asata.
Kwaheri.
Thank you.